My fiance just made the biggest mistake of his life, and I mean utterly ridiculous, straight toxic human being. Let me tell you what he decided to do. Mere hours before we're going to give our wedding vows, this one's going to shock you. I've always been quick to fall in love and fall hard for others. It's just something I've always done. When I was growing up, my parents' marriage was rocky, which led to divorce. My mother moved out and I stayed with my father, and eventually my father got remarried when I was a teen after dating my stepmother for a while. All this chaos in my life might have messed up my perception of love. If I found it, then I wanted to cling on to it as tight as I could. What if I ended up losing it? I don't think that I could live with myself if I did that. It was around 15 when I started dating. However, it wasn't until I was in my junior year of college that I met the man I was convinced was the one for me. His name was James, and he was going to the same local college I was. The two of us were in the same class, despite him being a year younger than me. From the moment we met, I fell hard. He asked me out soon after we met in class and went on a coffee date the same day. I don't think James fell for me as quickly as I did for him. For about 2 months after that, we got together. We weren't even exclusive. This wasn't my idea. James was too afraid to settle down quickly, so he wanted to date around. Eventually, I was able to convince him that we should be exclusive. I just felt so special when he told me that he was ready just to date me only. Some of the other girls he dated during this time did bother me. One of them even taunted me with a bunch of text messages one time. I cried about it, talking with my friends about what happened, and some of them said that I should break up with James because he wasn't serious about me. I brushed them off. All I had to do was convince James that we had to be, and it eventually worked because he agreed that we could have completely be exclusive. When we were dating at the 5-month mark, James's roommate ended up moving out, and he asked me if I wanted to move in with him. I was a little hesitant at the move-in, but he convinced me. It wasn't long after we moved in together that I realized I wanted more. Living together was nice and all, but I always imagined that when I was going to start living with a guy, we were going to get married. I started to drop hints soon after our 6-month anniversary that I wanted to get married. Whenever I did, James would brush me off or laugh and say it's too soon. Some might think that it was too soon because it's only been 6 months, but not for me. My dad dated my stepmother for only 9 months before they got married. Well, my parents dated for over 2 years and their marriage ended in an absolute disaster. So, just because you dated someone for a long period did not mean that it was going to work out. He ended up proposing to me a little after our 6-month anniversary. I knew it was coming, but I still tried to act surprised because the truth is I was very happy. James and I were meant to be together and get married. James seemed nervous about the impending marriage, but I promised him that it was all that was supposed to happen. When I told my parents, including my stepmom, about the engagement, I got a bunch of different reactions. Some were happy for me, while others were saying that I was making a huge mistake. I got the same reactions from my friends. Those who kept saying it was a mistake were ignored because I knew this was the right choice. One of those ones was my vocal, my mother. She said it was important to date someone for at least a year or so before you even could consider marriage. When I pointed out that my mom had dated Dad for a while before marrying him, she said things like that often happened. I'm not going to be deterred, though. This is what I was going to do. James and I were meant to be, and it might have taken a while to realize it, but I know that he loved me. From there, the wedding started to get planned. We didn't have much of a budget, so it was going to be a very small wedding. I was even going to rent my dress, and it was the best way to do things. The two of us were getting married young, so it wasn't like we had a lot of money to work with. Not that it mattered, because eventually we would get our lives together, save up money, and build our future. There's no reason we could not do that while we were married. It was just going to make things a bit more complicated. James left most of the planning to me, and whenever I asked him what he wanted to do, he just shrugged and told me I could do whatever the hell I wanted. As long as I liked it, then that was the last that, all seemed to matter. Again, you have to remember we only have so much money. I was going to try my best to budget and not go crazy in planning this wedding. When I was 2 weeks into my wedding planning, I was contacted by my cousin. We'd been very close when the two of us were young, and Sherri, being a little bit older than me, we still had a good time together. The two of us were more like sisters than anything else, to be honest. Our families were so close, so we spent a lot of time together, up until she graduated high school and went out on her own. My cousin had a pretty nice life. Her parents were able to provide well for her and doted on Sherri a lot. However, once Sherri graduated, she ended up getting into drugs and found herself with a really bad addiction. Sherri went in and out of rehab, and she just always ended up turning back to drugs just when it seemed like she got her life back together. At this point, Sherri was homeless. Either she had to sleep on the streets or she was sleeping in the homeless shelters when there was one open. The idea of my cousin sleeping on the street was hard for me to think about. I never wanted her to be at risk while sleeping at the street. So, after talking things over with James, I asked him if it would be alright if she moved in with us just temporarily. Sherri wasn't going to stay for long. She was just going to stay until she got herself on her feet. My mom was not happy to learn, so I invited Sherri to live with me. She might have been her sister's child, but my mom thought Sherri was nothing but trouble. Despite all the chances Sherri had, she still screwed up. You could only stand by someone for so long and give them chances before they ran out of them. Well, these were my mother's words, not mine. I didn't agree with my mom. Why should I turn Sherri away when she needed help? One would think my aunt would step in, but apparently my aunt and uncle weren't speaking to Sherri after she caused them to waste money on rehab again. According to my mom, this was the last time that they were going to help her out. I assured my mom that Sherri was not going to be staying for long. She would be just here for a few weeks until she got herself on her feet. My mother, at the time, she realized, that I was not going to change my mind, and she just said, fine. Why couldn't my mom understand that I loved Sherri? She was a good friend and a good cousin to me all the way since childhood. Sure, she had gotten into some trouble in the past few years, but this meant that I had to be continuing to be there for her no matter what. The day that Sherri finally moved in, she only showed up with one bag, and it was hardly to see her come here with only one bag in her possession. That was so hard to witness. But my cousin had spent nearly a year living in the street and in other homeless shelters. How was she supposed to even have any sort of possessions? James and Sherri seemed to get along. They had not met before, so for the first few days Sherri was there and things were a little awkward. But eventually we seemed to find a rhythm. I even invited Sherri to the wedding, something she had not known was happening so soon. She thought that we were going to wait a while, and that was originally the plan. But we decided that the sooner we got married, the sooner we could start sharing our life. Sherri had never been married as far as I knew. There were parts of her life that she kept quiet, probably because it was hard for her to talk about. The wedding was set to take place around our nearly 9-month anniversary. It would be about a week before it, and we were getting married in the church my parents went to, and the after party would be in my parents' backyard. As I said, it was going to be a very simple wedding because we did not have the funds for it. The dress that I rented was a strapless gown that I had very happiness with. It was a mermaid cut, and I thought I looked really good in it. I was tempted to show a picture of me in the dress to James, but then I realized that I didn't want to do that. He had to wait until I was walking down the aisle. I noticed that the closer we got to the wedding, James did not seem entirely excited. He seemed to be going through the motions, and it's probably just pre-wedding jitters, which was normal. A small part of me was afraid that I was pushing him into this, which was why he was going through the motions. Quickly, I got rid of those thoughts, and that was stupid. James loves me. Sure, I'd kept asking him to propose, but he never would have done it if he didn't want to. Sherri was adjusting well. I was busy with planning the wedding, so I wasn't entirely sure if she was still using it or not. She claimed she wasn't, so I hoped this was the truth. It would hurt to know that she was still using it after I opened our door to her. The day before the wedding, Sherri announced that she was going to move out by the end of the week. She had probably found a place nearby and was excited to move in. I hugged her, glad that Sherri was finally getting her life back together. Sherri told me that she intended to go to the wedding, which was confusing. I never thought that she was going to not go to the wedding, so I just figured out she was assuring me that she would 100% be there. Mom dared to tell me about the night before the wedding that I could back out if I wanted to. Then my dad hopped on the call. This was shocking to me because the two of them did not get along at all and were able to speak civilly with each other. The two of them must have been serious about this if they were showing such a united front. It was beyond angry that the gang of them ganged up on me like that, and after I threatened that they didn't even have to come to the wedding, they backed off and just wanted to make sure that I was, well, sure about this. In the end, I end up not disinviting my parents, but I'll tell you now that I was pretty damn close to doing it. Everyone needed to back off and realize that this was my decision. James and I were getting married tomorrow, and nothing was going to change the fact. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep because I was so nervous. Tomorrow would be the start of a new life with James, someone I knew loved from the moment I met him. It sounds a little intense, but sometimes you just know when something's right. The relationship between James and I was one of those things. Update number 1. Wow. I only came here just to complain about my family being against my wedding and trying to convince me not to do it, and the only update I thought I would give is one after my wedding with James and I officially being spouses. The wedding never happened, though. You see, James ended up breaking up with me just about an hour before we were set to say our vows. At first, I thought he was kidding. I don't know why I thought he was, but I was in some serious denial. He then told me that he was serious. He had fallen in love with Sherri during that time. They wanted to be together so that the wedding could not happen, and I was in shock at first. Tears were streaming down my face, but I didn't say anything. I didn't think I was able to speak because of the shock. When I asked how this could have happened, James just said that he didn't mean for it to happen. He never intended to get feelings for another woman, let alone my cousin. But this is exactly what happened. I wanted to know when it happened, and it happened soon after I told Sherri she could spend time with me. That was insane. The entire time I was planning my wedding to James, he was carrying on an affair with her. He said he wanted to tell me sooner, but did not know how to break it to me. I shouted at him that he could have done it any time other than an hour before the wedding. James told me he was oh so sorry, and then he just ducking left me in tears, all the way streaming down my face. Well, it was my mom who came to check on me when she saw James practically run out of the church without speaking to anyone. She asked me what happened, and I reluctantly blurted out everything. I was worried about telling my mom the truth, but thankfully she did not chastise me at all. Instead, my mom pulled me into a hug and told me it would be okay. I didn't believe her because I thought James was going to be someone I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and now I was alone. Mom and Dad were the ones to tell the guests that the wedding was off, and I did not go back to the apartment I shared with James, but rather went back to my mom's house, which was closest to the church. I wanted to burn the wedding dress, but I'd rented the dress, so doing that was not the best idea. James had not spoken to me since he ran out of the church. It was so pathetic that he did that, running away like a coward and refusing to speak to anyone on his way out. He was probably going to meet Sherri so the two of them could spend the rest of their life together. I had not heard from Sherri either, but I didn't want to hear from any of them. No one had said anything, but I bet that they were thinking I was a huge idiot over this. How did I let myself get so caught up in this romance? I spent the entire night looking back at my entire relationship with James. The entire time it had been me pushing things forward, and James never seemed serious with me. He always seemed like he was coasting along. One never wanted to admit to oneself that their fiancé was just coasting along, but the evidence was all there. I could not deny it. My mom told me that it was good that I found this out before I married him, because once I signed the paper, it was going to be difficult to break things off with him. I figured she was right, but it did not make it easier to sleep at night. When I woke up the next morning, I realized I was still pretty exhausted. The entire night, I tossed and turned and cried over losing James to Sherri. All of you are probably thinking I'm naive. I got that. I'm pretty naive. It was never a good idea to rush into marriage at my age, but while I was with James, it just seemed like it was a good idea. Update number 2. Hey guys, it's only been 2 days since my wedding almost happened. Well, I don't know if you remember, but my fiancé James told me he could not marry me because he's now in love with my cousin. The last thing I expected was to hear from James at all. He contacted me the morning of the second day after our wedding. It was a text message begging me to talk. I ignored him, but then he kept sending them, and eventually I agreed to meet him at a nearby park. When I got there, James was already in the park sitting on the bench. He ran up to me, and the second he saw me, he tried to pull me in for a hug. I took a big step away from James, refusing to let him hug me. The last thing I wanted was a hug from him. I asked him what he wanted, and that was when he started to break down crying. Sherri had been telling James for weeks that she was secretly rich. If he refused to marry me, then the two of them could be together. She would also make sure that she would take care of him because he did leave another woman for her. He found out yesterday that Sherri had completely lied. She wasn't rich and was homeless like she originally claimed. Everything she said was a big fat lie. I knew Sherri could lie and con people, but she never did it to me. Plus, she was family, and I seriously just wanted to help her. To see James on the other end of this filled me with a sick pleasure. He deserved this because of what he's done to me. And I said, so, she lied. What do you want me to do about it, dude? He starts begging me to take him back, and James claimed that he had let his urges get the best of him. It was all a huge mistake, and the one that he loved was me. I was the one who was meant to be with. It was like I had a eureka moment that he had never been thrilled to be with me. James was more just coasting and probably liking the idea of someone being so in love with him that they were willing to do anything. So, I told James that he could in no uncertain terms bounce off and leave me alone. After he started crying, I left and went back to my mother's house. She asked where I've been, and I explained everything to her. When my mom looked at me sympathetic, she also appeared to start laughing at the fact that Sherri had conned James the way she had. Now I saw why my mom didn't want me to have anything to do with Sherri. She was a user. I do wonder why she had been so determined to break up my relationship, but my mom just told me that she did it because she could. There's no other reason than that. Even if Sherri weren't on drugs, she would do the same thing, and the drugs just made her personality worse, my mother claimed. I came to see that she was right. When it came to people, I always tended to see the best of them, no matter how bad they might be. It was so embarrassing I'd chased James the way I did, and then invited Sherri to stay with me despite all the warning signs that were there. I was still hurting from the wedding falling apart at the last minute, and again also embarrassed. How could I ever be face to face and with my friends and family again? Thank God it was summer break and I didn't have to go back to school for a few more weeks, so I had some time to get myself together. Work was a different story. I still had to work, but my mom was friends with my boss, so I think if I had her explain the situation to her, I'd be able to get a small break. What I wanted was just to take a few days, just to cry it out and accept the end of my relationship. James was a jerk. His leaving me the way he did was probably a good thing, but right now it stung. There was the issue of my things still in his apartment as well, and I was not going to live with him anymore, so I have to go get my stuff. Maybe I could get my parents to do it for me so I wouldn't possibly have to see James again. Update number 3. Hello guys, I don't know if you remember me, but a few weeks ago, I posted about my fiancé who left me at the altar because basically my cousin conned him. At this point, I'm back home with my mom. All my things have been removed from the apartment I once shared with James, so I no longer have to worry about going back there. Don't ask me what happened to Sherri because I have no idea. She tried to get her mother to help her again, but she refused, and her father would not even pick up the phone. The last I heard, Sherri may have left the city and gone somewhere else. I'm not going to lie, I don't give a crap about what happened to her. I hate her and James, but I also suppose I should be thanking her. If James had cheated on me with Sherri, then I would have gone through with the wedding, as my mother said, be tied to him. Getting a divorce was much harder than breaking up with someone. James did not seem to get the memo, and the two of us were completely done. He kept texting, telling me that we were meant to be. I was mostly just ignoring him. Eventually, he would get sick of just pursuing me and move on to another girl. As much as I hated to admit it, James was quite attractive, so it wasn't like he was going to have any trouble finding someone else to be in a relationship with him. He knew better than to show up at my mother's house or bother any of my family or friends because none of them were going to take it well if he showed up. They might even kick his butt, which I was fine with. I don't know why he was so insistent on trying to get me back. He was the one to break up with me. Besides, he's paid most of the rent in the apartment and would not have any trouble finding anyone else to rent the other room. There were plenty of people looking for places to live, you know. Plenty of them were also his own friends. When James started ramping up the text messages, I decided to just block his number, email, and everything that he could contact me with. The last thing I wanted to do was have some more contact with him. I mean, honestly, it's only been a few weeks, but I was doing better. I no longer cried that much and felt relieved that I hadn't made the big mistake of my life. There's nothing wrong with marrying young, but you need to date people for a decent amount of time before you consider marriage. Dating someone for 7 months is not enough time to know someone well enough for marriage. It may have worked out in my dad and stepmom's case, but they were older. I was only 21 years old and was still in college. Well, here's hoping that James does finally leave me alone. I would love to never think about him for as long as I live. I mean, there's not much to say about this story. This one was a classic karma story. Here we have James, aka ex-fiancé of OP, who goes ahead and does something so ridiculous, so toxic, and just so disgusting. Going with a cousin of OP right behind her back. I mean, yeah, we see this sort of story before, but for some reason, this one was just extremely icky. I want to know your thoughts about it in the comments section, and let's just talk about if you were in OP's shoes just hours before the wedding, what would you do when you find out that your husband-to-be is not going to show up at the altar? Let's talk about it in the comment section down below, guys. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories like this every single day. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you want more, subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the description. I put some of my favorite playlists. I also have my other channels you can check out down there. So check that out. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And just remember, it's cool to be kind and don't be like James. See ya.